It hasn't really sunk in yet, so it's all kind of surreal, dreamlike a little bit. So I'm just trying to just get from where we are now to next week, where I expect to be sworn in and get to work.
So, public advocate, what are you going to do?
I have a tendency to speak about things that I believe can be done. So we had a pretty clear vision while I was running, and we expect to execute that. We wanted to make sure we were talking about deeply income tolerant affordable housing. One of the first things that are up is rent regulations in the state. We want to make sure we're applying as much pressure as possible. We had the opportunity to be traveling around the state for last year. We met a lot of folks that either don't have rent regulation and want to strengthen it. And we think we'd be a great place to organize to continue to put pressure. There's issues of transparency and accountability, criminal justice, hashtag Cuomo's MTA. So there's a lot of issues that we spoke about that we want to see get done. We talked about getting deputy public advocates in every borough and satellite offices in every borough. So we want to get started in getting those things put in place as quickly as possible.
You know, it's interesting you say that because there are a lot of people out there that think that this position shouldn't exist. What do you say to that?
I mean, it was interesting when I heard that. This was the first time I heard someone say, you know, this position doesn't have as much power as it should. Let's not give it more power, let's get rid of it. That doesn't really make any sense. So if someone's asking who knows about what the position actually does, and if you say, should we make it stronger? I would say yes. If we can have subpoena power, if we can have an independent budget, then absolutely. But just the way it is right now, with the powers it has and was granted when it was first created in 1989 and first elected in 1993, then we'll be all right. And so there's a lot of powers there, combined with the bully pulpit. You simply have the job of raising the people's voice and make sure government is working for them. That's an incredible honor.
So explain
to New Yorkers, because we went out there and we asked them, do you know what the public advocate does? And none of them knew. We asked about 10 different people. So why don't you explain to New Yorkers, what are you going to do? What does a public advocate do?
I would say, well, if you had asked similar questions about some of the other positions, unfortunately you might get similar answers. We have to do a better job of letting folks know what we do for them as government elected officials. But this in particular, when it was created, they gave it 5 powers after they said they wanted a position that would make decisions that's based on what's best for the people, not for themselves. That was the public advocate. The public advocate can introduce legislation into the city council. It's an ombudsman, it's a watchdog over city government and a go-between between the people and the government. The third is important. I really want to explore what we call a charter cop. The public advocate has the ability to make sure that agencies are doing their jobs that they're charter mandated to do. And the last 2, you have a vote on a pension board, make sure our retirees have the ability to live their best lives by investing or not investing in the best place, in the best places. And lastly, you appoint people to commissions like the City Planning Commission. Many people may not have heard of, but they do hear about the decisions they make in terms of things like rezonings.
What do you make of, you know, having that power? Because you're next in line if something happens to the mayor. The mayor hasn't ruled out running in 2020. So this could very well be a possibility. So
I'm not running to be mayor in 2021. I'm not seeking to be mayor. I didn't take this office to be mayor. I am prepared to do my job if that arises. For whatever reason, I'm ready to take over as mayor. But I ran actually to be the public advocate. I think it's very important to have someone in there that has the ability to have the courage to speak truth to power, the activism to raise issues when needed, even in the streets at times, and have the legislative and policy background to actually make those changes for the issues you've raised on behalf of the people, and that's what I'm focused on.
What do you make of this election? $15 million of taxpayer money spent on a special election that's going to once again have to be debated on in September and in November.
Actually, unfortunately, or fortunately, it has to be debated again in June and then November. I think this is an example of why people get angry at the system, and I can't blame them. This is the way it's laid out for this year. It's just a complete waste of money, and we really have to look at how this is set up so this doesn't happen again. It makes no sense to have a special election in February, a primary in June.
You think the special election was a waste of money?
No, I think the way we have it combined is a waste of money. So we have to take a look at this. Look, you have to have an election to fill a vacancy, and you have to have a general election. So we have to figure out, well, maybe should we try to combine the special with the primary? There has to be something we can do, so we're not having just continuous cycle of elections.
Speaking about the election, on the eve of election day, article comes out about this event in 2009. So can you talk about that?
Well, you know, I think it was an important conversation. One, some information came out from a case that was actually dismissed and sealed. When that happens, it's actually a nullification. But to the extent that it came out, I think people had the right to ask questions about the information they heard and have right to have a person who's running to be citywide answer those questions. And so we thought it important to be transparent, to be clear about what happened, and to talk about what I learned since that time 10 years ago. And we did that.
What have you learned?
Well, you know, I used to talk a lot about privilege, particularly around race, black and white. And as I went through life and having conversations and understanding that privilege comes in many forms, whether you're cisgender, whether you're straight, whether you're a man. And you can learn that privilege shows up in different spaces, even in a verbal disagreement. There's a power dynamic that is associated with privilege, and we have to understand that and show up better in those spaces. And we have, and we do.
So one of the issues that I think is going to come up as you are the public advocate is marijuana. You know, a lot of people are talking about what do we do? Do we legalize it? Do we tax it so that we can, you know, fund the MTA? So what do we do about that? What is your personal view?
I mean, a lot of things that I've been supporting for many years were labeled as crazy, and so I've been talking about legalization of marijuana for almost a decade now. There were advocates were talking about it for decades before that, but what has to be clear is we shouldn't be talking about legalization without discussing the expungement of records at the same time, and making sure that people, whether they have a criminal history or not, have access to sell this new product that's going to be coming to market that we used to arrest people for. It's very important. I refuse and will not accept and support a plan that wants to take that money and put it into the MTA. I think that's ill thought out. One, it's not enough to sustain what has to be done with the MTA, but second of all, that money must first go into communities that have been most aggrieved by over-policing of this thing that we're now making illegal.
Now, you're a Brooklynite, so let me ask you, have you smoked weed?
Have I ever smoked weed? No. Have I ingested it? Yes.
So what does that mean?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can ingest. There's brownies, there's cookies, there's chocolate items.
So you've done brownies, cookies.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about gay marriage, because in the past you had a different view, and that's evolved. So can you just say, for the record, what is your view on gay marriage and on abortion?
Well, I'll repeatedly say, so I'll say it again, I support marriage equality 100%. I have for quite some time. There was some evolution that happened, like many people in this country actually. That evolution occurred, and I'm proud of my record in fighting for the LGBT community, and I'm glad that it is where we are now, so that everyone just needs to be treated equal and equitably. When it comes to abortion, I have always supported a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to have safe and legal abortion. But people have actually tried very hard to misconstrue my position on both of those positions. And I'm just thankful that the people of the city of New York just didn't buy it.
So if you were put in a situation where your partner felt that they wanted to have an abortion, would you support that?
Well, a lot of this came from things that have happened in the past. So I have had that happen. I have had that kind of experience, and it was, you know, an experience that many people have to go through. But the fact of the matter is, it's not my body, and I think that's what's key here. And so there's a lot of questions about what I. The question is, does a woman have the right to choose? The answer is yes, and we have to make sure that there are laws that protect that. I am, I think, probably the only elected official who was running that actually authored, got votes for, ultimately passed a law that protected that here in the city.
The immigrant community here in New York, a lot of them feel that they're under attack. There's a record number of deportations. So is there something that as public advocate you would want to do on that?
There's a lot of people under attack under this orange madness that's going on emanating from the White House, whether it's the LGBT community, whether it is women and women's rights, black and brown communities, and immigrant communities. And the answer is yes. We call ourselves a sanctuary city. I want to quote my colleague in Queens, Jimmy Van Bramer, in saying that we need to be a fortress city. And there's a lot of ways we have to do that. And we're not as sanctuary as we think. When I was putting my body on the line to prevent an illegal deportation, on the street was NYPD and ICE working in concert, throwing us back and forth. We need to figure out how that happened, and so that doesn't happen again. It might have happened, incidentally, but it still happened. And there are other things that we have to look at. If we're using over-policing in certain areas, we may think folks are safe here in New York City, but one, we realize that they're not because deportations have increased. And two, once you step out of New York City, the rest of this state is much more purple than people understand.
So I'll ask just two more questions because I know that we're short on time here. Speaking of Jimmy Van Bramer, we had the Amazon deal, which you came out strongly against. There has been a lot of polling, and a lot of the people, people of color, Hispanics, black people, they supported the deal according to the polling by 71%, 80%, because they thought it would bring jobs. So what do you say to the African Americans and the Hispanics that supported that deal and feel that they were left behind because you came out as a strong voice against it? Jimmy Van Bramer certainly did. Do you have any regret on that? Do you feel okay with being attached to the quote-unquote Amazon killers, as they were called on the daily news?
Polling is tricky. If you ask the right questions, you can get the answers, different answers. But I do want to make clear, I signed on to the letter originally simply because I think it's a dereliction in duty not to engage on someone who's talking about bringing 25,000 jobs and economic development. I did express my concern about certain practices that Amazon had, whether it was labor, the way they treat the labor force, or not paying taxes. I still wanted to engage. But when I woke up a year and a half later and there was a deal that was cut, that was one of the most horrific things I've seen, the amount of money that was being given in tax breaks. And then on top of that, we gave away our ULEP, our land authority, without even extracting anything more from the richest man in the world. That had to be brought to light. And we learned out from our friends in Seattle that many things that they were saying they would do, they didn't. The $25,000, 25,000 jobs may not have even been as real as they said. Those were conversations that we should have when they talked about union busting. Those are conversations we should have. So it seemed to me that the deal couldn't survive sunlight. It seemed to me that Amazon was not interested in being a really good partner. They were interested in setting a hunger styles game up. And so I say we should be proud that people's voices were heard, but we should lament the fact that we didn't have the opportunity we should have to really talk about this economic development. The difference between Amazon and Walmart is Walmart hurts small businesses because of proximity where they are. Amazon is going to hurt small businesses whether they're in Virginia or New York City. So what we should have done was use the power of who we are to make them change practices, to extract something that might have been beneficial to New York City, or at least see if we can, but we didn't. And the reason we have the blame for what happened are three men: Jeff Bezos, Andrew Cuomo, and Mayor de Blasio.
Okay. Finally, because I know we're short on time, I just want to, what do you want New Yorkers to know about you that they can't Google about you?
Well, my first love is acting, and so that was what I was going to do. I have Tourette syndrome. When I'm on stage, the tics go away, so it's an amazing zen place for me. And then I guess what I discussed in election is that I think it's time to discuss the importance of therapy, the importance of mental health, particularly in black and brown communities where they aren't talked about as much. And I try to be really open about that because I think it's critically important.